Hello and welcome to the Radiate Wellness Podcast with your host, metaphysician, Reiki master, and hypnotherapist, Christy Clemens Hoffman. Each week, we will discover teachings, tips, and tools to radiate your best life ever with practitioners, authors, and luminaries to help you on your path. Wellness, joy, peace, abundance. What do you want to radiate?
Welcome back to the Radiate Wellness Podcast, where today we radiate mythology, something that is near and dear to my heart, with LeTao Wang, who is located in Hong Kong and has a very impressive resume with astrology and counseling and tarot. In fact, I do want to talk about this during this episode. LeTao has a new divination deck that's out, and it is about celestial deities. I'm so excited. All right. Well, LeTao, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Hi, hello, Chrissy. Thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Wonderful. So you've got quite an impressive gathering of tools in your tool belt. What did you start with when you knew that you wanted to help people and work with them?
Right. So when I first started my spiritual career, I was doing something slightly different from what I'm doing now, actually. Because when I encountered my first astrology teacher, I was very much trained as a fortune teller, so to speak, because my first teacher, he was a famous fortune teller in Sydney, Australia. And at that time, I was doing my first master program in Sydney. And I learned a lot of predictive techniques from him using tarot and astrology. And of course, I started my career with that, right? So I spent a lot of time talking to clients and trying to answer their questions about what will happen in their future. But slowly, the more I, progress in my career, the more I realized that what I really was interested in was not about predicting people's future, but it was more about the therapeutic value in our session. And because when a client is suffering from anxiety about their future, I don't really think that telling them about their future is a way to cure it. And I developed a lot of this huge tendency towards doing therapy and counseling. But of course, at that time, I didn't have any academic background in counseling. And so about 4 or 5 years after I started my career as a fortune teller, I went back to grad school again and did my second master program in counseling and clinical psychology. And that's when I became more clear about what I really wanted to do, which was combining the divinational and the mystical art in our spiritual profession, combine that together with a modern psychology and counseling. And that's how I basically became who I am today.
Yeah, I think that the things that you do, I do some of the same things. I don't do astrology or tarot, but I do oracle cards and readings. But some of this can be very, very therapeutic because we're looking at the whole person and including the unseen forces behind us. So that's a wonderful thing that you went into counseling, got your education there, certification, etc.
Yeah. To be honest, people working in our field, right? I mean, spirituality is such a huge field. As far as I know, you are also a Reiki master, right? That's what I read about you. And so there are all different kind of things that we do. But what I also noticed that sometimes what we learn can also become a little bit like a blockage for us. And one of the examples I can give to you is that when I was pursuing my master program in counseling, and of course, with your classmates and teachers, and you talk, right? You talk about what you do and why you're doing this master program. And I noticed a lot of people, they were a little bit, I wouldn't say they're scared, but they're very skeptical when I tell them what I do. Because one of the things that I realize is, I'm not saying everyone, but I've noticed and I've encountered some psychologists, and literally they say to me, I'm not you. We are academics, we're PhDs. We don't do that kind of fortune telling, weird, witchy stuff. We're research based, whatever. Yeah, that's what they self-claim. And so sometimes for us, the things that we do, because it's not something that at a young age people learn, right? You don't learn spirituality at school. And specifically, I think in my culture, because I grew up in a very traditional Chinese family. And so anything that is related to superstition or mysticism, my parents never encouraged me to learn them, to study them. And so sometimes I also feel that in order for us to do therapeutic work, it's also a challenge for us to how we can justify, our own beliefs and our own philosophy and combine that with the so-called science-based psychology and put them really together seamlessly and make that work for the clients. I think that's also something that all of us have to overcome. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. And we have to treat the client gently with reverence and look at their whole picture rather than just going right to what we consider the fortune or
Yeah.
what's coming up, helping them understand some of the things that are going into it, some of the decisions, and some of the energies that are adding
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Right?
100%. Yeah.
There are so many avenues that we can take in this, as you know,
Yeah.
and you chose astrology and tarot. Can you tell me why?
So because my first teacher, spiritual teacher, he was a professional astrologer and he was also a mythologist. And when I encountered him back then, when I was in my early 20s in Sydney, he was basically the person who opened this door for me and he led me into this career. And that's what I learned from him about mythology and astrology. And he was a very different kind of astrologer because most astrology teachers, they would teach you very directly. They would go straight into the planets, the meanings, right? The house systems and the zodiac signs and the meanings. And you have to memorize them and things like that. But my first astrology teacher was not about those things at all. And he did a lot of storytelling, actually. He would tell a story from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and let's say about the goddess Hera, right? And then he will ask me, so what do you think the asteroid Juno or Hera on someone's astrological natal chart means to you after listening to this story? What do you think the archetype of Juno or Hera is about? And so my initial study with astrology is all about mythology stories. It's about how we tap into those ancient stories and understand the archetypes of those figures, the mortals, the heroes, heroines, and those are the gods and goddesses. And that really fascinated me. So that's how I started with astrology. And then later, actually, tarot came later to me. And after, because at the end of the day, tarot is also archetypes, right? The two major arcana, right? And so it's very much about the archetype and the 56 minor arcana. So tarot to me, it was at a later stage after I got very accustomed to astrology and mythology, and tarot just became much easier for me.
No, you're absolutely right. The pulling in the archetypes, even with tarot, you've got the color, the movement of the lines, and everything feeds into it, the symbology that goes into it. I just absolutely love that.
Yeah, it's very much about that, right? So I think of something I teach students, right, about how to read cards as well. And one of the things I always tell them is never memorize, right, meanings from a guidebook, but look at the symbols on the card and what do you get from that, the colors and everything, right? And use your own intuition. And there's nothing wrong. If you feel that means certain things in your reading, that probably is right about that. And so I'm totally with you on that part.
Well, the mythology also is very symbolic. I mean, you've got all the icons and the iconography that goes with each of the mythological figures. And like Leda and the Swan, what does a swan represent? Narcissus. What does that pull in, right? There's a lot of symbology.
Oh, yeah. It's all connected. So I really feel that learning mythology was a very important way for us to understand better about astrology and other esoteric arts.
Yes. And I think you just helped me connect those dots there with the mythology, astrology, and tarot all together. I can see how they can be seamless.
Yeah. And it makes it more interesting, right? With a little bit of stories. I mean, personally, I learn things much faster and I feel more connected with stories. If there is a background story there's something connected with each other, right? And I mean, my Mercury is in Leo, so I like theatrical stuff. I like stories and drama, that kind of stuff. So it really worked for me when I followed my first astrological teacher.
Well, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. Now, with your astrology, I know there's different types of astrology. It sounds like you follow more of the what we would call the Western astrology. Have you delved any in like Vedic astrology or any other forms of astrology?
I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to ask you a few simple favors. First of all, please rate, review, and share this podcast wherever you're listening. It sounds like a simple little thing, and it is, but it has a huge impact for us because it helps other people find us in the podcasting algorithms. I don't know how it works, but I do know that it helps a lot. Next, if you would subscribe or follow wherever you're listening, whether that's YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you're listening, just hit subscribe or follow, and that helps you and it helps us. It helps you because then you receive notifications when we have a new episode that's out. It helps us because, again, algorithm magic, I don't know what happens, but it helps. And then finally, you can support our podcast in a tangible way by going to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast and then click on support the show. Now, we have a new feature too. We are now on Patreon. You can find us on Patreon. You can also find the link to Patreon when you go to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast. So on Patreon, for $3 a month or $5 a month, you can support your metaphysical and spiritual growth. You can learn about upcoming guests, and you can get early and ad-free versions of the shows. So please support us. This podcast is free for you to listen, but we have costs, and quite frankly, they come out of my pocket. So if you like this content, if you get a lot out of it, please see what you can do to give back. Thank you so much.
Not Vedic astrology, but so I'm a Western astrologer, even though I'm based in Hong Kong. I've studied Chinese astrology as well, but Chinese astrology is a completely different ballgame. It's not even related to the so-called planet archetypes that we talk about. I don't know how much you know about Chinese
Enough
astrology.
to make me dangerous, yes.
So, when we talk about Chinese astrology, probably most Westerners would think, oh, it's about, okay, so the 12 Chinese animal signs, right? So people say, okay, I'm a dragon, you're a goat, I'm a rooster, that kind of stuff. But when you really,
right.
It's about that, right? So, but that's really the tip of the iceberg, really. And when you really dive into Chinese astrology well, it's actually all fall under the system called I Ching. And it has it's extremely complicated. And so I spent some time actually studying a branch of the Chinese astrology. It's called 奇门遁甲 in Chinese. And it's a little bit similar to the Western horary astrology. I don't know if you...
No,
okay, so horary... Okay, so usually, the so-called astrology, right? In Western astrology, there are also different branches. Mainly when we talk about astrology, people tend to talk about natal astrology, meaning that the time you were born, okay, the day, the month, the year you were born, and what does that mean, right? What kind of tendencies you tend to carry. Horary astrology has nothing to do with your birthday, actually. It's talking about answering questions based on that time. For example, a typical question is, I lost my key now, and I want to know where is my lost key. And I cast a chart of the sky now. I want to see where the planets are now. And based on that, the sky will answer my question about where my lost key is. Or I have a question, let's say I just had a job interview, let's say 2 days ago, and suddenly I have this urge to know whether I will get an offer and when I'll get an offer. Yeah, is it going to be tomorrow? We're going to have to wait for a month or whatever that is. And then when I have that urge to ask that question, you cast a chart of the sky at that moment. Where are the planets scattered in the sky? And based on the relationship of the planets and their house allocations, that answers your question if you're going to get an offer and also when you're going to get an offer. So that's called a horary astrology. So 奇门遁甲 in Chinese is a little bit like that. It's based on if I'm going to get an offer, where's my lost key? Does my boss like me? Am I going to meet someone significant soon within this year? Any questions, as long as you have that urge at that very moment, the sky will answer that question. So it's a little bit similar, yeah. But the Chinese system is very convoluted, and there's a lot of things to memorize. I haven't mastered that yet.
Well, there's a lot of things to memorize with tarot as well.
True.
I don't do tarot. I do oracle.
Yeah. But I feel tarot is more graphic, right? Because there are pictures there. So of course you do have to memorize certain things, but a lot of the times you can just based on a picture, you can use your intuition. But 奇门遁甲 in Chinese fortune telling is not graphic. There's no photos there. There's no pictures. Everything is words. So it's a lot of calculation. It's a little bit like half math. You have to be very good at doing mathematician calculation, things like that. In order to do that. So it's a completely, like what I said, it's completely different ball game. I don't know if I will ever master that, but it's different, definitely very, very different.
That sounds very interesting. Just when you think that you get a handle on something, you realize there's so much more to it. I think that Western astrology was the only thing. No, even within
Yeah,
Western astrology, like you're talking about, there's many
yeah,
different branches.
yeah.
I mean, you can study this your entire life and not get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My astrology teacher it still tells me that he's learning new things every day. So I guess we're students forever.
We're students forever. But when you
Yeah.
stop learning, I think you stop living and you stop being interesting.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So you do a lot of things, spiritual readings. So what do you like to look at? Like when people come to you for a reading
Mm.
insight, what do you like to bring to the table? What kind of things do you like to focus on?
So one of the typical things I will do at the very beginning of the session is I will ask them what they are trying to get out of this session and what would they like to feel when they walk out of my session. So I think one of the key points about counseling is that it's very client or patient centered or oriented, right? It's not about what we know and we teach them because it's not a class. It's more about understanding their needs and their psychology. And then one of the most important thing I think in whatever counseling it is. So for example, in my work, what I do is spiritual counseling. And very, very important that me and the clients are really aligned. And I think this works for what you do. Maybe you have a Reiki student or whatever. You have to really be aligned in a way that you want to work together and you are willing to build a trustworthy therapeutic relationship with each other. And then it becomes mutually empowering, not for both of us. And so when I'm empowering them, they're also feeding back the positive energy. Then I know I'm on track. I'm doing the right thing with them. And I really feel that I'm sure there are a lot of people listening to our podcast. And if I would say to our audience, if you decide to go to, let's say, an astrologist, a counselor, a therapist, whatever helping professional they are, really make sure that you are ready to be aligned with them. Personally, I have dealt, most of my clients are amazing. They are very aligned with me. They really want to work together on the issues and the challenges they have. But I also have to say that I've encountered very difficult clients as well who do not want to work on anything. And I'm sure you have experience in that as well. It's a bit like a patient going to a doctor and the patient said, I don't want to take medication, but cure me. You're a doctor, right? You say you're a professional doctor. You have got, I don't know, a medical degree, so fix me. But I'm not going to do anything. You fix me, right? So when we have that kind of attitude, it's very difficult for this therapeutic alliance to be established. And that actually is not good for either side. And so I think the key point for what I do in one-to-one counseling sessions is about building that trustworthy relationship and to be open towards each other.
Yeah, no, I agree. Everybody's got to do their own work.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody can fix anybody else.
Mm.
I believe that all healing is self-healing. All insight
Mhm.
comes from within, right? You're just the guide.
For some clients, of course, our intention is to go through this healing process with them. But sometimes what I also notice is for some clients, maybe they're not really ready to heal. And one of the typical example that I can give is usually for people who are going through a little bit grief. Let's
Yeah.
say they have lost a significant person in their life. And sometimes when they come to the session, they're not ready to heal yet. They still need to grieve, just to feel sad for several days. Because I also agree with that. I feel that they deserve a little bit time to feel sad because you can't just tell someone, okay, now let's get up and let's get back to life. And because you still have a future. So I think this is a reason why I said usually at the very beginning of the session, I always have this very open conversation with my client. What is your goal today? Do you just want to simply talk about how you feel, or you're trying to resolve a issue together? Or what questions do you have? What do you want to get out of this session? Because the worst thing that we as professionals could do with a client is we're crossing our boundaries. We're telling them what to do, but they don't really need it. I think that for any type of one-to-one counseling or therapy, it's a must for us to start the session with those questions.
Yeah, establish some guidelines and only give them what they
100%.
what they want and what they're
Yeah.
looking.
Yeah, I learned my lesson definitely. I mean, in the early days, I didn't know those things. So I would assume that I'm helping a client, but along the session, I would realize, oh, but that's not what my clients want. They don't want me to guide them through this path. They need something different. Like what I said earlier, right? And you also nodded, we're forever a student. We learn from our clients as well.
Every client, we're learning something, right?
Yeah.
Let's kind of shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about your oracle decks. Yeah, your oracle decks, because although you practice tarot, do you have any tarot decks that you originated yourself?
So not tarot, but oracle cards, yes.
Right. I love oracle cards. That's what I do. I love them. And I know you've got this new deck out called the Oracle of the Celestial Deities.
Yeah.
Looking at your website, you also have Oracle
Yeah.
of Heroes.
Yeah. So Mythic Heroes was my first publication, actually. So this one came out in January this year, 5 months ago. And so these two are, you can see the Celestial Deities as a sequel of Mythic Heroes. So this one, Oracle of the Mythic Heroes, is based on 40 mythological stories, which is also my own rendition of Greek mythology. And I focus a lot on the mortal stories. So instead of the gods and goddesses, what you'll find in this deck of cards is the stories of mortals. Achilles, Theseus, Atlanta, Orpheus, Hercules, even though some of them are demigod, but they were written in mythology as mortals. And the reason was because I really believe that there are a lot of the so-called gods and goddesses guidance out there, cards or books, but we rarely talk about heroes and heroines. And at the end of the day, they're human, and that's what we are. And we still learn so much from those mortal stories, and we still live exactly the same life experiences with them. So this is an inspiration when I created this deck. And the Oracle of the Celestial Deities was the second part. This deck is more about the gods and goddesses. So you can also use these two decks together. They're the same size. You can shuffle them together, and you will find actually the gods and goddesses together. They will appear together actually in the reading, in the big spread that you do. And that's actually my intention, because I want to have this whole picture of, let's say, Iliad and Odyssey in the spread. And through the connections of the heroes and heroines, you will find the guidance there. This is one of the uniqueness about these cards, is that most oracle decks, cards and cards are not related. Let's say you pull a card, for example, it says love, and another card you pull out, it says letting go. For example, those are just very common things you see on oracle cards, but they're not related together. You pull one card and that's one message there. But for these two decks that I developed, you can actually pull them together. So for example, when you are asking about, let's say, a work project, let's say you're working within a team and you pull 3 cards, and among those 3 cards, you see, for example, Athena there, you see Hera there, and you also see Aphrodite there. Of course, you can interpret them one by one, and individually. But just by looking at these 3 cards, you already know that this is not going to be a good teamwork. Because you got 3 goddesses sitting together, but those 3 goddesses are the ones that appeared in the story Judgment of Paris. And all of them wanted different things. And all of them were fighting to become the most beautiful goddess in the world. And that's why they all try to bribe on Paris in the story and say, if you choose me, I will give you this and I give you that. So when you ask about a teamwork project, you see these 3 goddesses appearing in front of you. You already know everyone wants different things. Everyone has their own agenda. So this is what I find interesting about my own oracle deck, is it's not just about the individual interpretation of each card, but it's about the relationships of the people, of the gods, how they work together. Do they love each other? Do they hate each other? Are they enemies? Are they friends? Or are they using each other sometimes? That's what my intention, and that's how I created these 2 decks.
I can't wait to get my hands on these decks. I'm going to order some today.
I hope you will love them. Yeah, if you love mythology, this is definitely something for you, I think.
I do love mythology because there's stories for everyone. There's stories that we can all identify with.
Yeah. Actually, I have a question for you. So in the States, I mean, do kids learn Greek mythology in school? Is that something common for kids to learn?
They can. There's a series of books for children about Percy Jackson. And yeah, and it's kind of like Harry Potter, but with mythology.
Yeah.
And maybe not in schools, but I mean, it depends on the school. But I think people should be interested in mythology because these stories are so universal. And I think a teaching tool would be nice. What about in Hong Kong? Do they study mythology?
Not really, actually. I mean, unless you go to an international school here. I mean, we have some, very expensive and prestigious private international schools here, right? I mean, your parents have to be rich expats, right? And then your kids will go to those schools. In those schools, possibly you will learn Greek mythology and things like that. But if you go to a local school here, no. Yeah.
Ah,
And my early education, the closest I ever got to mythology was learning about ancient Chinese literature, fictions. And so you can call them Chinese mythology, but the point was also not really about the story, but is when we learn them in school, there's usually an agenda there, an educational agenda there, right? So
right.
the most mythic story that we learned as a student in our literature class was a famous Chinese literature called A Journey to the West. And that was about the Monkey King. You know, the Monkey King with a stick, right? And he would accompany the monk, whose name was Xuanzang, all the way to India to obtain the Buddhist Sutra. So that was the mythic literature that we had to study, but that was it. But most of the other things were more serious stuff, the wars,
Right. Rulers and dynasties and
political stuff as well. Yeah.
now the Chinese zodiac, the Chinese astrology. I'm a
Uh,
dragon. And so is that also based in mythology?
So Chinese has its own mythology, right? But the 12 zodiac signs, they do have their mythological stories, but it's not as a system like the Greek mythology, because it's almost like there's a timeline there, right? This happened first, and then that happened, and that happened, and that's related to the development of the region, and that's also related to the history. But the Chinese mythological story was much less historical, but more imagination, I would say. Yeah. And so, for example, the 12 Chinese animal signs, there was a story about why they were in that sequence. Why is a rat the first one, and why is a pig the last one? When in Japanese culture, the last one is not a pig, it's a boar, but it's similar. And the story was about them having a race. The god in the sky says, okay, now you guys run, right? And whoever get to the first, then you'll be the first one. So it was more like just imaginative stories for children. So it's a little bit different.
Right, right. Like kind of like Aesop's fables in the
Oh
West.
yeah, very much like that. Thank you. Very much fables. Yeah.
Right, which is also a form of mythology because it's so
Mm.
archetypal. Archetype?
Archetypal. Yeah, yeah, archetypal. Yeah. Mm.
I'm an English major and still words mystify me. Now, people can contact you and learn more about what you do. You actively seek clients now, right? Are you taking new clients?
Yeah, so I do one-to-one spiritual counseling sessions. So I'm based in Hong Kong. Around 20 to 30% of my clients are actually overseas. So it's quite common for me to have an overseas a Zoom session with someone all the way in the States or in Europe. Some of them are in Australia as well. So they can contact me through my official website is www.thehealingkingdom.com, or they can also find me through my official Instagram account at LeTao Wang. So my name.
Wonderful. Instagram. And we'll put these links in the show notes so
Yeah,
that people can contact you easily. Um,
absolutely. Yeah. And they can also purchase my Oracle decks from Amazon. They just put the name there and they can easily find the two Oracle decks.
Wonderful. Yeah, I can't wait to find that. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important? Anything you bring to the table that you would like people to know that maybe we haven't mentioned before?
Let me think. So, mythology, astrology, tarot. Do you think our audience would be interested in knowing more about things related to astrology, personally speaking? So, for example, several days ago, I had a podcast with a guy, and he literally asked me a few astrology related questions from his audience. Because people were asking questions, right? For example, people say, okay, so people talk about sun sign, moon sign, ascendant sign, but what does that mean? What's the difference? Things like that. Do you think our audience would be interested in those things?
Absolutely, they would.
Ah,
Absolutely. Because we have Radiate Wellness is a group practice. I do
yeah.
not do astrology myself. Like I said, I know enough to be dangerous. We have an astrologer for that. But I know that people are always curious about these things,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Because it's a
yeah, yeah.
vast field of study.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
Anything that you think is important for us to know about that?
Okay, so I think just for our audience sake, I think some of them might be interested in going to an astrologist, have a session and things like that. So I think there are some basic things that we need to know before we go to an astrologer. The first thing that I really would love our audience to know about astrology is actually different from the common belief that astrology is about prediction It's actually not. At least this is not something that I believe in. I don't really believe astrology is about predicting future. I believe astrology is more sort of like a reflective tool for us to understand how our mind and how our emotion works for us or against us.
See, and this is
Um,
where I think that your counseling degree
huh,
really comes in handy.
I agree. I agree with that. And I think when we go to astrology session, I would really encourage our audience not to see this as tell me about my future. Will I get married? When will I find my soulmate? When will I be rich? Those things are very, I have been asked those questions a lot. Specifically, if someone has been to a Vedic astrologer, because one of the biggest difference between Western astrology and Vedic astrology, it lies in that Vedic astrology is very much about fate. So
Yeah.
for example, yeah, so yeah, you agree, right? In India, if you go to an Vedic astrologer, they will literally tell you at age, for example, 23, you will get married. And at age of 30, you will have your, I don't know, the second child. And blah. So it's very much about telling you what will happen, and this is your destiny, and deal with it. It's a little bit like that. And the reason why I don't practice Vedic astrology, because I believe that there is a sense of fate in there. I do think that there's a sense of destiny in there, but that's 50%. And that's the so-called the seed that we're born into this body, into this family. So the foundation is there. What kind of parents you have to deal with when we're a child, right? The childhood issue, right? That something is in a way it's destiny because we don't get to choose what kind of environment we grow up in. However, when we have the seed, it also depends on how we want to water them and fertilize them and what kind of weather condition that we give to the seed. And so what I will also say to our audience is that always see astrology as a reflective tool, something to help you maneuver through your challenges and your future, rather than seeing that as a predestined verdict that we are given. And the second thing that I also want to say about astrology is in case people want to know the sun sign, moon sign, rising sign, of course, there's a lot of things on an astrological chart, right? There's Mercury, Venus, Mars, Pluto, Neptune. But if you have to pick the most three important things on the chart, let's say as just an astrology fan, you don't want to dive into it too deeply, but you just want to know something very basic. The sun sign, moon sign, and your ascendant sign or your rising sign, they're the same. Other three things you must know. And the difference is that the sun sign is talking about your illumination. Obviously, the sun is the one illuminating in the sky, and that's where the light is from. So it's talking about where you need to walk towards, because we're all looking for our enlightenment, our illumination in our life. So the sun sign is talking about the quality or the archetype you're trying to learn to embrace in this lifetime. And the moon sign is actually much simpler because the moon is not something you need to learn. The moon sign is talking about what you have already brought from either your past life or from your early childhood environment. And that's your natural reaction, your natural emotional reaction, your family quality, the archetype of your mother, let's say. And so let's say a Libra sun sign person, their life mission is to become someone who master their skills in diplomacy, in their own sense of justice, dealing with relationships, because that's what Libra is, right? Me and you, relationship management, diplomatic relationships. But if their moon sign is in Aries, then you can imagine they were born full moon. The sun and moon are opposing each other. So their emotional reaction might be different from what they need to become. So moon sign in Aries could be talking about someone who is very explosive in their emotion. Let's say if they're being triggered, they can have a go with someone right away. And that kind of like stops them from being a Libra, what I mean, because being a Libra, to a Libra, you have to be very diplomatic. You have to think what to say before you throw a temper tantrum. And so you can see the sun moon, sometimes depending on the signs they are, it also talks about our challenges. And so we understand more about our natural reaction towards things and what we need to be. And the ascendant sign or rising sign is talking about the path that we need to walk in order to go from the moon to the sun, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, again, we're talking about the sun sign Libra, moon sign Aries. If this person's ascendant or rising sign is in Virgo, then we know he needs to walk the path of Virgo in order to get to that Libra sun sign. And the Virgo is about service. It's about practicing, working, and providing a useful service and humble service to the community and to the people around you so that you will become that diplomatic person, or you will be able to manage better relationships, or become a relationship master and things like that. And so those three things, if you know very well, those three signs based on your birthday, your time, you already know a big part of your astrological chart.
Right. And I believe self-knowledge is key, just to know yourself as you would seek to know another person. This was the downfall of King Lear in Shakespeare. He ever did but slenderly know himself, and that's what led to his ruin, that he just didn't know his own mind. So it's important to do that.
I think that's amazing. You mentioned that. In one of the chapters, actually, in Oracle of the Mythic Heroes, I wrote about this part because one of the chapters was about Medusa. And Medusa, as a mythological figure, she was a victim. She was very tragic because she was sexually assaulted by the god of the ocean, Poseidon. So he became a woman with snake hair, and you can't look at her in her eyes. And usually her energy represents a blockage there. And that's related to what you just said earlier. You can imagine if someone cannot open their eyes and see their own reflection, of course, they will feel blocked and they will feel stuck. And so it's very much about understanding when we can truly look at the mirror and see our own reflection, then we break that blockage and then we break the shackles.
Yeah. We could go on about this all day because it's such a vast topic. And it's,
I know, right?
I would love for people to contact you and find out all of this stuff, because I think it's important that we know ourselves and we know what's coming up for us. The best way to contact you would probably be to go to your website. Is that correct?
Yeah, go to my website and there's information about how to contact me and how to set up a session, the session price and everything. And they can also have a look at my Instagram and to see, because sometimes I do a monthly or weekly astrology talk, so they can also understand a little bit about my style if they feel comfortable doing a one-to-one thing. Because sometimes that's what I do. If I want to book a session with someone, I go to their Instagram, I listen to how they talk, I look at them, and I feel I like this girl or this guy's energy, then I'll contact them. So encourage them to check whatever about me.
Perfect. Yeah, I see your WhatsApp numbers up here as well. So that's a good way to contact you. So the
100%.
website again is thehealingkingdom.com. And I'm talking here with LeTao Wang, who's from Hong Kong. Thank you so much, LeTao, for joining me today. This has been enlightening and very, very helpful. I think it's going to be a very popular interview here. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Christy. This is great. I wish we could talk more.
I know. I could talk to you all day, seriously.
Yeah.
All right. We'll have to have you on again then.
Right. Thank you so much.
Don't know what to watch next? Decisions. Well, we've got some suggestions. You can click this little video here and watch that. It's something that we think you're going to like. If you like the last one, you're going to like that one too. You can also click on the subscribe button. And if you do that, then you'll get notifications whenever we have a new video up. Win-win, right?